Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here. I will be speaking today, first of all, about a provincial by-election, then about some of our plans for the fall, and finally about recent statements about the government of Alberta made by a candidate in the current federal election. So, first of all, the people of Calgary Foothills will be voting in a by-election, which will be held on Thursday, September 3rd. This by-election is necessary because of the resignation of the former leader of the Conservative Party on election night. I was hopeful that we would be able to get a new MLA elected before the federal campaign began. Unfortunately, that has turned out not to be possible. However, I still believe very strongly that it is absolutely appropriate to call this by-election now to ensure that the people of Foothills are represented in the legislature when the Alberta legislature reconvenes this fall for deliberations on many issues, not the least of which, of course, is the provincial budget. During this by-election campaign, we'll be talking about the good work Alberta's new government is doing for the people of Calgary and for all Albertans. Every family in Alberta will benefit from the work of the new cancer centre that we will be building in Calgary. And we are also getting to work to complete Calgary's Ring Road. And we'll be getting to work shortly on flood protection. And we are focused, I believe, on the right priorities overall. Which brings me to my second point, our plans for the fall. The legislature will reconvene in October, likely on October 26th. We will present a provincial budget that restores stability to our hospitals and to our schools. Our budget will also set out a roadmap to a balanced budget without self-defeating, unnecessary, and damaging cutbacks to healthcare and education that Albertans need and want. And as we all know, there has been a significant drop in the international price of oil. Albertans have seen price booms and busts many times before, and we all see the price that we pay for being too dependent on one commodity and one price and for failing to save for a rainy day. So the government of Alberta will therefore be also setting out a job creation and economic development plan this fall. Our plan will address the infrastructure Alberta needs for a more modern and diversified economy. Our plan will address how we can support small and medium-sized business and manufacturing. Our plan will promote trade development and trade diversification, and our plan will promote innovation and diversification and employment options, similar to what we spoke about during the election. The details will be presented during the session. And finally, we'll be acting on the challenges we face on climate change, and we will be considering what our royalty structure should look like as international prices recover. Next week, we will be announcing more details about the expert panels that we will consult on both of these issues. So, a fiscal plan, a jobs plan, a climate plan, and a royalty plan. I think these are a few issues anyway that the new MLA for Calgary Foothills and all of their colleagues will be able to consider and debate in the legislature this fall. Let me conclude with a few brief remarks about federal politics. So it is unusual for prime ministers and premiers to attack each other during federal election campaigns. We've all been elected to serve the people. And to do that, I believe that we need to work to try and get along. And we need to be able to maintain relationships that allow us to work together. For the record, I completely reject the Conservative campaign's comments about the decisions of the people of Alberta that they made last spring. Whether their federal cousins like it or not, the people of Alberta decided they had enough of the Conservative government in this province, and they decided to elect a new government that made a commitment, which we kept, to replace a regressive and unfair health levy. In place of that levy, we introduced a normal corporate tax rate, and we introduced a normal progressive income tax system that asked those who've done the best to contribute a little bit more. We don't have a sales tax in Alberta, so Alberta continues to have by far the lowest overall provincial taxes in Canada. We are also not going to implement a $1 billion cut to health care in Alberta, as the former Conservative government proposed to do. And we set out these priorities during the Alberta election campaign. Now, the Conservatives in two different flavors laid out their cutback proposals, and the people of Alberta made their choice. So we're going to keep working to deliver on the commitments that we made to the people of Alberta. And we will work to advance those commitments with whoever is elected to run the federal government on October 19th, as amicably and as cooperatively as they choose to allow. Because that's what I believe Albertans voted for, that's what Albertans are looking for from their leadership, and that's what I will continue to endeavor to provide. So I'm happy to take questions.
On the issue of the federal campaign, will you get involved? Will you be backing anybody, endorsing anybody, or even helping to campaign in Alberta for any candidates?
Well, you know, Graham, you'll probably be surprised to know that I'm a member of the NDP. In fact, I've been born and raised in the Alberta NDP, and I have never not voted NDP in a federal election. Indeed, I was very pleased this morning to come out of my house and discover my Linda Duncan sign had arrived. And in addition to that, I have a great deal of respect for Tom Mulcair's work as the leader of the official opposition, and I like him on a personal level. He's a good guy. So that's where I sit. That being said, I have a pretty major day job. And in my view, that day job should be focused on doing the work that the people of Alberta elected me to do. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. And I believe that in focusing on that, I have to do what I can to maintain cooperative and collaborative relationships with my colleagues so that I can, you know, federally, in order to be productive. And no matter who wins the next election, I will work as amicably and as cooperatively with them as they will allow.
So you're not actually then endorsing, we saw Kathleen Wynne in Ontario say it's time to get rid of the Conservative federal government. You
will likely see me involved in this campaign. It's very possible that you'll see me at rallies in support of Tom Mulcair and the NDP, but my activity will be quite limited overall, and whatever engagement that I do have will be very much focused on talking about the policies that I like of the candidate that I support. I am not going to engage in negative campaigning against other candidates. I don't think that that is helpful.
Just back to Harper's comments, I'm wondering if you have a sense of just why you think he pointed to your government as a disastrous example of NDP government.
You know, I can't begin to look into the campaign war rooms of other candidates in this federal election. As I said, I think it's fairly uncommon for candidates for the Prime Minister of the country to run a campaign against premiers. I think we have seen the reverse occasionally, where premiers do that against Prime Minister, but it's a little bit of a new day in that regard. I'm not going to comment on it. As I say, I am focused on doing what I think the people of Alberta elected me to do, which is to focus on delivering the plan that I ran on, that they chose, which I believe they still support, and to do it in a way that maintains my ability to work collaboratively with my colleagues across the country, both other First Ministers as well as whoever is elected Prime Minister in October 19th.
They only said it in French in Quebec.
Again, you know, I think you guys are as good at speculating about the political intrigue and so-called strategy that may or may not be there as I am, and so I'll let you do that.
What do you want to see discussed by the federal candidates when it comes to Alberta in this lengthy campaign?
Well, you know, that is a really good question. Some of the things that we've already raised before, we know we have some pretty significant infrastructure issues across the country, and they exist here in Alberta. You know, for instance, we have a lot of work to be done on flood infrastructure in Calgary. We're also very concerned about the state of healthcare. And so all provincial premiers identified very clearly at the First Ministers' Conference that we needed for the federal government to re-engage in federal investment in healthcare, because the cost pressures are growing, and the provinces have had too much downloaded to them by the federal government over the last few years.
You just mentioned some the disaster assistance, the recent the floods. There's also been some significant hail damage in Calgary the last 2 days. They've had some interesting weather. Are you open to discussing further about helping these cities out who are, you know, fronting a big part of the bill when it comes to fixing their infrastructure after these sorts of weather events?
I think we have to look on it on a case-by-case basis, and I think that's what we'll continue to do. And meanwhile, that's another reason. I mean, we're very focused on moving forward with our climate change plan, because I think that we also need to acknowledge that if we don't start to do our part with respect to those issues, that, you know, we're going to have greater costs down the road. And we know it costs everybody. It costs municipalities, it costs the insurance industry, it costs the provincial government, it costs the federal government. And we need to start thinking about both how to mitigate these things in the future, as well as reduce the likelihood of their occurrence going
There's
forward.
Canadian Natural Resources this morning that says that its loss for the second quarter were mainly due to the increase in corporate taxes. What do you answer to that? And that seems to be in the same, you know, kind of things that would say that the Conservative candidate federally, actually.
Well, you know, I think different corporate players in Alberta are going to engage in a public discussion with Albertans in different ways. We feel quite confident that we're effectively working with most oil and gas leaders to move forward with both the climate change strategy as well as how we deal with the royalty regime as prices recover. And so I'm going to continue to do that. It's not surprising. Yes, when you pay a higher corporate tax, it does mean that you have a little bit less profit. But at the end of the day, you know, Albertans clearly considered that issue very thoroughly in the last election and determined that when it comes time for all of us to pull up our socks and tighten our belts because of the fiscal challenges that we find ourselves with, that everybody needs to chip in. And so that's the way we're going to go forward.
You mentioned
We'll take this question, and sorry, Jody, we'll take this question and then go to the phones.
most oil and gas leaders have been open to this. What kind of pushback have you felt from the others?
Well, you know, I think really to the extent that there has been any, it's really what you've seen in the media. And for the most part, we've been having exceptionally productive discussions with them. Both my environment minister and my energy minister have been having good discussions. And of course, I've been reaching out to leaders within the oil and gas industry pretty much since the day after I got elected. And so for the most part, I've been quite pleased with their willingness to work with us on these things. And I think that you know, I'm quite optimistic that we'll be able to get to an outcome that we can all live with. And that's what I think is what we told Albertans we would do, and that's what we will work towards achieving.
Go to the phones now. Operator, are there any calls on the line?
Your next question comes from the line of James Wood with the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking the call. Two questions for you. If you don't mind. The first, I guess, is do you have concerns about the timing of this by-election and how it might impact voter turnout? And also, I've heard some concerns raised by the Wild Rose already about that their nomination isn't going to be held for another week or so. Can you address some of those concerns about the timing of the by-election?
Well, I mean, with all due respect, you know, the people, the people who I'm most concerned about ensuring their needs are met are the voters of Foothills, and I think that anybody calendar they could get an October 9th federal election to the government to come back in to pass a budget. And they could have looked at the fact that probably a likely time for this by-election to occur was going to be in late summer, before you got into the real acting part of federal. And so I have no doubt that the Wild Rose will be able to adjust to this. They're a resourceful group of folks. And as far as I understand, the rest of the parties, or at least the Liberals, I believe, and I think the Conservatives, have nominated candidates. But in any event, we've all known that this by-election was necessary. And so it shouldn't be coming as a surprise to anybody who can look at a calendar. And the alternative would be for, as I said before, for us to go into a fall session to talk about a budget without the people of Foothills having an MLA. And to me, that is a much bigger transgression.
Premier, the other question I wanted to ask you is just in relation to the federal election. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about the impact of your victory on the federal NDP's fortunes. I'm wondering specifically in Alberta, what difference do you think it's going to make for the federal party, the fact that you folks are in power now and I guess have a bit more of an organization? Do you think what impact will that have on the federal NDP's prospects in the province?
Well, I think it's really hard. It's a bit of a chicken and egg argument to determine whether the increased level of activity and excitement and prospects for the NDP federally in Alberta are related to our election, or whether in fact it was already there and this increased activity is a product of a change of opinion, generally speaking. There's no question that I have been quite encouraged to see the number of contested nominations going on in Alberta, federal ridings, places that we've never had contested nominations before, so it's certainly very encouraging. 5 or 6 candidates contesting a nomination in Calgary. It's very encouraging. So I think that people are very excited about the record of Tom Mulcair. I think they're encouraged by the platform that Tom Mulcair is putting forward. And I think if any impact has been had, it's that the provincial election in May showed people that they could vote with their heart, and it might get them the answer that they were looking for. And so it's opened up the opportunity for the NDP in a way that perhaps hasn't existed federally up to this point.
Operator, can you put it to the next
Thank you.
caller?
Your next question comes from the line of Lucas Meyer with 660 News Calgary. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. Hello, Premier, and everyone in Edmonton. Premier, you mentioned the appearances you may go on during the election. I'm just curious, you're just speaking about Mr. Mulcair. Have you recently spoken with Mr. Mulcair about the campaign or even about Alberta specifically? And secondly, if something comes up during the debate tonight, specifically about Alberta, depending on what it's about, is it possible you may provide an official response or release, either directly after or even in the morning? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I haven't actually spoken directly to Tom since June when he was in Alberta. But I'm generally aware of what's going on in their campaign. It's certainly not my intention, as I've said, to actively engage in this federal campaign, other than where necessary to correct the record with respect to the work of this provincial government. So that would be the extent to which I engage in any kind of reaction to the discussions in the federal election. I think that it should be a race between the candidates who are running to be Prime Minister and the candidates who are running to be MPs in the House of Commons.
Premier, can I ask you, on the election campaign, what about the length of it? I mean, here you are, you're trying to get things done, as you say, on flood mitigation and otherwise, and yet now you're working with a federal government that's essentially in policy stasis until late fall.
Yeah, no, well, there's no question that the length of the federal campaign is a problem for people who are trying to get work done with the federal government, and it's unfortunate. As I say, it's had an impact with respect to the fact that we have to call a provincial by-election in the middle of it, and it was a bit unexpected, and I think there's been a lot of commentary on the strategic considerations that drove that decision, and I don't know that good public policy was necessarily one of the priorities that drove that decision. So, we'll do what we have to do at this point, and we'll have a long list of things to talk to the new federal Prime Minister, or the new Prime Minister and his government, or her government, about come October 20th. And I guess there'll be a long list that's built up, and they'll just have to deal with it.
The Prime Minister said that it was necessary, that in terms of a level playing field, that we needed to have an 11-week campaign.
Well, that was an interesting argument, and I think we've seen a lot of analysis that suggests that was a bit of a tortured analysis. Again, I think I'll let people who have talked about the pros and cons of that decision lead that discussion. Again, it's not my plan to get super involved in commentary on the federal election.
We'll take your question.
About anything that's not about our record.
Phone for 2 questions, and then we'll wrap up.
And just a quick question about, back to Alberta, a lot of counties declaring agricultural disasters. A lot of people saying that the provincial government is not doing enough to help these farmers who have to, sell their cattle, sell their herd, who are having issues making ends meet. What's your response to all of this?
Well, we're very concerned, obviously, because we know that, with weather events like this, that it can have such a profound impact on the bottom line of people who work so hard growing food and raising livestock in Alberta, and that's a very important industry to Albertans, and it's very important to rural families. That's why our Ministry of Agriculture has been out around the province, visiting communities, visiting with people impacted by the drought, and talking with community leaders. And you'll hear more from him this afternoon about plans that are coming forward with respect to supporting those families. And I suspect that what he talks about today will not be the first time that you hear from him in the weeks to come.
Go back to the phones now. Operator, can you put through the next caller?
Your next question comes from the line of Mike D'Souza with Reuters. Your line is open.
Yes, hi, Premier. Thanks for taking the call. I wanted just to clarify, at the top or at the beginning of your news conference, did you say that after the legislature reconvenes, your government would be tabling a balanced budget?
I said we would be tabling a budget which maps out the path to a balanced budget. We are not planning on tabling a balanced budget this fall. I think we've been quite clear about that. That was very clear in our campaign platform, and quite frankly, there was not a single party in the last election that proposed to table a balanced budget this fall.
Okay.
Or this spring.
Would you be going to knock on doors in Calgary foothills?
Yes, I will. Absolutely be doing that. I look forward to it.
We'll take our last question from the phone. Operator, can you put through the next caller?
Your next question comes from the line of Jameson Burkow with the Business News Network. Your line is open.
Premier, I know you already addressed the Canadian Natural Resources comments about lower profits as a result of a higher corporate tax, but they also had some third-party research saying that the loss of that income to them is going to translate to about 4,100 work years of lower employment. So they're claiming at least it's hitting the jobs numbers as well. Can you respond to that?
Well, I think probably the most significant issue, and most economic experts would suggest that the most significant issue impacting job numbers at this point is obviously the 50% drop in the price of oil. So that's a 2% change in corporate tax relative to a 50% drop in the price of oil. I think we can all assume that it is the latter which is driving some of the challenges that the oil and gas sector is dealing with.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.